It's 10:30.
All right, so my computer is telling me it's 10:30, and yeah, I guess it is. Okay, so um a few people in the chat room already answered the question, but yeah, how do you guys get your news? Like where do you find your news?
Well, for me, it's like since I don't have cable for the most part, we mostly you ever search for it on specific like websites which we trust, such as like CBS or stuff like that. Like we choose
Uh,
we search for the websites through that, or we search for a streaming service which shows the media and whatnot, the different types of news. And in the case of the freedom of the press, I think the freedom of the press is so important for functioning democracy because without proper freedom of speech and whatnot, and proper like exposure to different viewpoints and whatnot, we wouldn't really be able to decide for ourselves like how we want the democracy and everything to be run, and how certain laws would get in place. Like we wouldn't be able to spread our ideals, which would lead to instability.
yeah. Yeah, so different viewpoints is big, right? Because for example, um two people could see the same thing but get two very different interpretations, and news outlets, they know this, so they're going to um sometimes they give both sides to a particular issue, sometimes they give one side over the other. um but yeah, you say because you don't have cable, you use the internet to provide you your news, right? So um that is definitely one of the advantages of the internet, right? Is that we have the news 24/7 right at our fingertips. Um so Alexia writes, the freedom of the press is important for a functioning democracy, because without it, it wouldn't truly be a democratic community. So Alexia, how wouldn't it be a democratic community without freedom of the press?
Because freedom of the press, freedom of the press, it's like you're able to share your thoughts and your opinions about subjects such as government related issues and stuff like that. If the government doesn't let you express your opinion on how they're doing, then they're kind of not accepting any feedback to how they could improve themselves. And if they're not doing that, then it's like they're not really caring and they're just ruling how they want and not considering their people's opinions. So would that be more of a totalitarian state instead of a democracy?
So yeah, this is actually, so I'm gonna actually write a few of your answers down. Different viewpoints, right? That was one of them. But also as like an act of feedback in many ways, right? Like I guess the press in many ways acts as the voice of the people, right? Like a lot of news outlets will advertise themselves as like the voice of the people. Um, but in many ways it does, right? Because typically journalists are just people like you and I. They don't work for the government, um and so they can act as like our voice in that sense. And maybe if the press wasn't able to have that freedom, then yeah, maybe maybe governments wouldn't have an idea of what the people want. And so, yeah, it could definitely have that trickle down effect into totalitarianism, where it's like the government is not even serving the people and their needs anymore, right? Especially if the government is not aware of how people feel about things. And I guess it's also like a peaceful way of criticizing the governments, right? Because there are other ways that people could criticize the government, and one of them is protest, which is also supported by the First Amendment. But also another way is through revolution. Really, America, that's what America was founded on, was revolution. Um, and the British actually, at one point, they banned gatherings of people. They banned it. Because they didn't want, like, the Boston Tea Party, for example, that was seen as like a violent protest. Um, and so in response, the British were like, okay, in the colonies, you can't have gatherings of a certain amount of people. And so, but in the Constitution, it's stated, no, you should have gatherings of people. But another way to maybe, prevent violent protests is to grant the press these certain freedoms. So people, living amongst the general population can, report and comment on certain issues. So that's actually a very good use of a very good reason why freedom of the press is important. Jacqueline writes that she finds her news through social media and television. Yeah, I mean, obviously, those are the two probably most common ways to digest news. And the thing with social media is like, the news can just pop up on the feed, right? On your page, your homepage. On TV, I guess you have to go to the channel where news comes up, and also I think you have better control of what news you digest through TV rather than on social media, only because you can subscribe to certain news outlets. However, the people you're following, they too can subscribe to their own news outlets. And for some reason, there are a lot of people out there who take it upon themselves to like spread certain, to share certain news articles, and maybe this is their own way of reporting the news, right? Like we could ask this question, like, why do people, like regular people, like not even journalists, but regular people, why do they share certain pages? Besides, to get attention, like, because that's one obvious reason, but why do you think people share news articles? You know, I mean, I think it's mostly because people have like this instinctive need to want to educate others or enlighten others or bring awareness to certain topics. And they think that by sharing it, on their social media pages, that'll help spread that awareness, right? But, sometimes those pages are just misinformed or not even accurate. Um, Actually, a few weeks ago, um, does anyone know the show Last Week Tonight with what's his name? Uh, I'm forgetting his name. Hold on. Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Is anyone familiar with that? Well, anyway, it's like set up as like the Daily Show. Like, who's familiar with the Daily Show here?
I am.
Yeah, it's like, Well, the Daily Show is more like parroting the news. You know, last week tonight is something similar. You know, it's like this a similar concept, but it's more, I would say, informative about specific issues, but there's still comedy and jokes thrown into it, right? And John Oliver had this one episode about how so like how Facebook is trying to fight against misinformation, right? We've had this conversation before, like Facebook and Twitter and even YouTube, they're trying to filter out misinformation. However, it only really applies to like English written um information. Like if something's written in English, then Facebook or Twitter will flag it for bias or misinformation. But if it's written in other languages, then it may not, for whatever reason. Like if there's um, an article written in Spanish, for example, about how the I don't know, the Moderna vaccine actually, gives you cancer, and it's written in a different language besides English, it may not be flagged for misinformation for whatever reason. And that's what this particular John Oliver special was about. And
I think,
it's actually fairly interesting. Yes, David.
sorry, yeah, I wanted to comment on that. Like, I think the reason why that stuff might not get flagged at times is primarily because of the fact that it's like the people reading it most likely, like they're most likely the main language would be English and whatnot, so they might have a harder time reading it and understanding it. Therefore, I'm like that might lead to people not being able to flag it because it's like they're having a hard time understanding the language, possibly. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And I am almost tempted to show you a little bit of that John Oliver's episode, just to put into more context how like how people like how easy it is to get around these censorship flags that again Facebook and Twitter attempt to attempt to police misinformation. And again, we could have a debate over whether um it's actually ethical for social media pages to um monitor what information is spread, because I've heard like the argument that it is a little bit of a violation of freedom of speech. However, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, uh, um, TikTok, they're not they're not publicly owned companies. So, this concept of freedom of speech may not necessarily apply to them. However, if you're a journalist, right, and you say something that's wrong, that is a blatant lie, you can get sued for libel. So is there a contradiction there, saying, oh, well, Facebook doesn't have to follow? Well, actually, it's not a contradiction, if you think about it, because if you're writing an article full of lies, and you try to claim it's freedom of speech, well, you could get sued for spreading misinformation. I don't know. You know what? I'm Again, this was a spur of a moment thing. I didn't plan it, but I think I might show you just a little bit of this John Oliver clip, only because again, I'm somewhat inspired to show you now and how easy it is to, you know, spread misinformation. And then we could have like a debate about why would people spread misinformation? What's the point? You know, but to wrap up, Jacqueline's point, she says, you know, social media and television are two ways that she consumes her news, right? Freedom of press is so important for a functioning democracy because it will get everyone's different views and coverage. For example, there are some people who lean on the left and people lean on the right. And so, you know, it tries to get both views. I mean, I do feel like it sometimes tries to pander to those particular viewpoints only because it is also a business, right? You know, news outlets, they're a business, and because of that, they have a specific audience in mind, and they try to fulfill the needs of that particular audience. And so that's why they frame their news a certain way. You know, if you watch, you know, compare Fox News and NBC, for example, right? You could tell they're most of the time they're not being particularly balanced in their coverage. They could, you know, cover the same exact speech said by the same exact person at the same exact time, but they will frame the speech in particular ways as to appeal to a certain mindset that its specific audiences might have. Okay, so before I read more comments, you know, just, you know, right, misinformation. And I'm gonna skip around because there is another video I want to show you, and it's a much longer video, but I think, you know, this really helps drive the point home a little bit.
TikToker who created a charming video of things narrowly fit, taking it down in English to create this ad. Meet Kavya.
Oh, trying to find the specific part of the video I want to show you guys.
But very close to their hearts.
Okay, so this TikTok user actually made like a parody of you know, on, is anyone familiar here with the app called WhatsApp?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an app where you could share messages, but you could, you know, you could share messages. But it's also, you could link it to your other social media pages. And what happens a lot, though, is for whatever reason, people also share news articles through WhatsApp. And someone made a parody of, you know, a page full of misinformation that's kind of like framed in a way where it could be believable to someone who doesn't know better. Okay, so
Boil black peppers in water and add lemon juice, it kills the virus, which would be great news if it was true, but you know, it isn't. The problem is so familiar to younger generations that one son of Indian parents mocked it on TikTok like this.
Here's how you make brown parents believe literally anything. You're going to start with the plain background and write whatever you want, but just make sure you write it in this font. That's crucial.
right, so this is a way to make your parents believe, oh, if you're Indian, right? If you're Indian, this is a way to make your parents believe in anything, according to this TikTok user. And I think it's kind of accurate.
Now mention any religious text and talk about body, mind, spirit, or something like that. And make sure that you mention a Harvard scientist helped write it in this font.
I'm gonna go back
On
to the
TikTok
beginning.
like this.
Here's how you make brown parents believe literally anything. You're going to start with the plain background and write whatever you want, but just make sure you write it in this font. That's crucial. Now mention any religious text and talk about body, mind, spirit, or something like that. And make sure that you mention a Harvard scientist helped confirm ancient wisdom, because we love those headlines. Now make a diagram that looks scientific and religious at the same time, and throw some Sanskrit on there. Don't worry about accuracy. Beautiful. Now mention some chemicals. I chose Kanye and Drake's name and made them look like compounds. It doesn't matter if they're real or not. Our uncles and aunties have PhDs in science, but that's no match for WhatsApp. Now it's imperative that you insult Western medicine and culture at this last part. You know the drill, 3 dots, 3 exclamation points, cite your sources, and make the image quality a little worse. And that is perfection.
Yeah. Yep. All it takes is a few superficial labels and style choices to convince people that something with no real substance is actually meaningful and good. Or as it's known in America, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And while that was grow up, and while that was clearly fun, that guy later posted a follow-up saying that his image had worked slightly too well because it was making the rounds on WhatsApp, but not always as a joke. And we have seen the very real impact.
Okay, so to recap, all right, I want to see if I could get a
That's insane, though.
larger image. Right.
The funny thing is that looking at it closely, it does look kind of legit.
Yeah, it
You know,
looks
like, you know, the substance is obviously nonsense. It's like you're looking at it, it looks legit. It's funny.
yeah. So
That's
I'm trying to get a bigger image of this guy's his fake little samosa linked to cancer cure. To break it down more, because according to John Oliver, according to the guy who made it and being reported by John Oliver, supposedly this little prank actually worked too well, where a lot of people actually believed it. Believed that, and again, we saw how the guy made it. Samosa linked to cancer cure. Again, he just says, make it look little, fancy writing, and the Upanishads, it is discussed that food containing tula, balance in the fat, carbs, and protein, satisfy the mind, body, and spirit. Harvard scientist now confirms ancient wisdom. Right? Why does he say Harvard scientist?
Mainly because I know that it's probably a prestigious school, and it's specifically centered toward their culture, most likely. I believe, most likely.
Yeah, because it's a prestigious school, right? So if you're gonna trick someone into believing something that's factual, no offense, but you're not gonna use CSI, right? People will be like, well, who the hell's CSI? But if you say it's Harvard, people might be like, oh, it's Harvard. All right. Maybe they know their stuff. And to appeal to, to specifically say Upanishads or Upanishads, whoever knows the proper pronunciation, you can let me know. But yeah, they're trying to automatically make whatever this is appeal to people who might be part of that religion, right? I guess in America, if you were trying to make this more appealing to someone living in America, maybe you said according to, I don't know, Apostles verse 10, whatever. Jesus rose from the grave or whatever. And now Harvard scientists have found DNA evidence. Anyway, so he has this whole, he says like he's trying to make again, it's a parody, but combining something that looks a little scientific-y with something spiritual to almost imply what? Now the science is, proving spirituality to be, based in fact, and now, and then teasing Western food right here. Western food and medicine do not contain this one, which is funny because it's like almost like bad grammar here, but I guess as part of the joke. Please share with friends and family to show the beauty of Indian cuisine, right? What is this? Please share with friends and family. What does that prompt someone to maybe do?
It prompts them to just, for me, I think it's probably like they're probably prompting you to simply pass it on, like pass on the misinformation and whatnot. Like this
Right,
encouraging you to do that.
pass on the information. Hey, let everyone know about this secret that supposedly a Harvard scientist discovered.
The sad
Right.
thing is that I think like just based off of the looks itself, I think it's most likely like most people, it's meant to be like most people will like look at only at the top or something like that without reading the actual content itself and seeing the bad grammar and all this other stuff and all these inconsistencies. And they'll probably just look at it and pass it along immediately. Like right when they look at the title, they'll be like, oh wow, this looks legit. Let's pass it along to other
Yeah.
people, even though it's the content is obviously not.
Right. They're not going to really look too deep into it because, again, it just pops up on social media, right? And they look at it when do you typically look at your, I don't know, whatever Facebook page, whatever social media app you use, when do you typically peek at it?
When I'm bored and have nothing else to do.
Yeah, when you're bored and you have nothing else to do, right? You're not really searching for something interesting. You're not saying, okay, my goal today is to look up news on something that can improve my life and it's scientifically based. No, you're just scrolling on your phone when you're bored, or maybe when you wake up in the morning or before you go to bed, right? Or during your downtime, et cetera, et cetera. And someone who doesn't know any better might, just glance over this, not look up if DRAKE accelerate is an actual thing. And they might share it for whatever reason, simply because they see it in bold lettering, please share with friends and family. And they think that this is an actual, fact because simply because it says source, Harvard 2020. But Harvard 2020 could mean anything, right? It just, they won't take their time to verify their facts. And that's why misinformation is so easy to spread. And there are plenty of other examples I could look up too. I'm going to go back to this and I'm going to do a Google search of, misleading memes or misleading news memes, because I feel like a lot of the times this happened as memes. Well, memes are usually jokes, but misleading news articles. Like, this one, Michelle Obama deletes Hillary Clinton from Twitter. And obviously here in this image, the word false is slammed right on it. But if you ignore that false sign, this would almost look like it could be a real news article. What else? Okay, this one is actually really good. Washington Post, unprecedented, ending crisis, Trump hastily departs White House, right? That looks like a real news article, Like if you didn't know any better, you might actually believe that. I mean, it looks
It's
prof-
11 o'clock.
professionally done. Hold on, I want to find another one. Or breaking, first person to be charged for threatening to assassinate Donald Trump. And again, that looks pretty legitimate. Right? I mean, look at how it's structured. It has a mugshot of someone, the bit, politics. I mean, why would people do this? Why would people share? Well, why would people create fake news?
Ivor,
Let's
as
say-
shown,
oh, go ahead.
you want to go? Or
You can go.
Yeah, David,
it's
you
like
go first.
Ivor.
Yeah.
Either it could be used as like a joke sometimes, or like just to joke around, or it could be to literally spread their viewpoints across to the world. Like if they know that their viewpoints, in a sense, are they don't have much evidence based off of that stuff. It's like they'll probably make up certain scenarios to encourage their viewpoint. Like for example, it's like if you're trying to get somebody reelected or something like that, or you're trying to get a certain person out of office, you'll spread misinformation about bad doings. I mean, no, about wrongdoings. I said it horribly wrong. It's like you spread that type of information to encourage people to your side, basically, sway them towards your viewpoints.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's there to intentionally mislead people so they become convinced of a certain viewpoint. And my opinion of this is like, well, you're just a cheater and a sore loser if you gotta lie to people in order to convince anyone of your viewpoints. But yeah, I think that's what it is most of the time. Sometimes it's parody, right? They're trying to make fun of something, you know. Elmore writes maybe it's to gain attention. Alexia, what were you gonna say?
I was gonna say that if they believe strongly in something, but they know that a large amount of people believe what they believe to be untrue, then they'll create false information as if it is true to gain backup and support by other people.
Yeah. Actually a classic example that's recent. People, and I think it was more of a joke than anything, but I think people legitimately believed it. That
Yeah, probably. How are you gonna like that? Wait, it's like, oh, sorry.
that the supposedly corona alcohol could kill the coronavirus, right? I think that was mostly like a joke, but still there were people who actually believed it. And that's based on misinformation. And there are still people who believe in a lot of misinformation. And I think they mostly, like, especially when it comes to the coronavirus, there are a lot of people who believe in certain lies and unproven facts about it, about the virus and the vaccine, right? And if you're someone who's hesitant about the vaccine, I understand. I'm not trying to like make an argument as to why you should get the vaccine, but you shouldn't get the vaccine. But there's obviously a lot of misinformation about it. And I think it's there for political purposes, but also to take advantage of people's fears, right? So Elmore writes, I find news on Spectrum New York One is every morning on TV, since their news is based on New York City, right? A lot of us wants to know about local news, right? I think press is important because it allows us to have more inside view of the government, but this also has a major disadvantage due to the fact that some news outlets are biased. This also led to the government having means to control the press. I mean, I do think to a certain degree the government can control the press, but they're not supposed to, right? Now here's another question though. What is newsworthy, right? We hear that term used a lot. Does anyone know what that term means, newsworthy?
Newsworthy, is it like interesting to capture a big enough audience's attention?
Yes, to a certain degree. Absolutely. But how do we know what an audience would want? How do we know it captures an audience's attention? And believe it or not, there are certain parameters of figuring that out. And there are actually 7 things that are determined as what is newsworthy, you know. And again, these are just particular ways of trying to figure out what someone might want to hear. And it's not always about something interesting per se, but it can be something that A is important or B is interesting. I mean, or A is important or something that um is topical. And there are actually 7 quote unquote rules of determining newsworthiness. And if you ever take a journalism class, you learn about these things even more in journalism class, but it is important even for the topic of technology and how it deals with the news. So 7 elements of newsworthiness is A, the impact. And as described here, people want to know how a story is going to affect them. What consequences will be suffered if they don't take action on your issue? How can they improve their lives by buying your product or service? So, for example, why are elections covered? Well, people want to know, how will a particular vote impact them, right? How will a certain candidate impact, and their views impact their daily lives? Or how will, the weather impacts them, right? That's why news channels will almost always talk about the weather at some point, because people care about how today's forecast might impact their everyday, their daily lives. Timeliness is called news, according to this, is called news for a reason, because it's new information, right? Sometimes learning about something that just happened yesterday, is more important than something that happened 20 or 30 years ago. The more recent your information is, the more likely people will find it of interest, especially in today's age of internet immediacy. Yeah, I mean, the internet, again, news can happen in real time. So timeliness is important. Proximity, local news, for example, people care about maybe something happening close to them in their neighborhood. So, for example, if there's going to be traffic cameras in Staten Island, that might be more newsworthy to somebody living in Staten Island than somebody living in Wyoming, right? Why would somebody in Wyoming care about traffic cameras on Staten Island? Human interest, right? And this is a broad category. These are stories that show something about the human condition or humanity itself. So for example, inspirational stories, something, things that make us laugh or smile or derive purpose or meaning or want to help others. So like stories that make people happy or stories that make people angry, so something that plays with the human emotions, that also is newsworthy. So, for example, I don't know. Yeah, rags to riches story, or someone being released out of prison for 20 years for a murder that they didn't commit, right? That might make the news. Somebody found, innocence of a crime that they didn't even commit, right? Conflict is a big one. Fight, right? It's our nature to gravitate towards conflict. This is why like sports is often covered on the news, not because people care about sports and they're gonna watch it. I mean, that's part of it, sure, but sports is often always about A versus B, conflict. But also a reason why, for example, the former president was often, so often covered on the news is because he was always having like Twitter beef with somebody, or always raising a controversial, viewpoint or argument, or trying to pass a controversial bill into law. That's why, I mean, people wonder, well, why was Donald Trump always on the news? Well, because he inspires a lot of conflicts, and that's just the truth. The bizarre, right? Another newsworthiness is the bizarre things that might have shock value or even clickbait, right? Clickbait is newsworthy. It may not be fun newsworthiness, but it is newsworthy. And celebrity, people that everybody knows of in their daily lives. So, why would I don't know, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck, dating. Why would that be newsworthy? Right, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez, right? Why would that be something newsworthy? Anyone? No one? No one could speculate?
I guess because it's an unpredictable relationship.
Maybe, but I mean, yeah, that's definitely part of it. But if I don't know, I'm gonna say pick a random student. If I don't know if okay, better yet, John and Jill from the corner of your street, right? Your street, your neighborhood, just random John and random Jill, they got into a divorce because Jill caught John, having an affair with his secretary. Why wouldn't that be newsworthy?
Maybe it's more expected. I don't know. You hear about that kind of stuff all the time.
Well, you do, but the news would never talk about somebody just, from your neighborhood, right? They would talk about celebrities. And Jacqueline says it, and so does Elmar, because they're well known, right? These are well known people, and so because they're well known, more people care about them, right? So, and we see this through social media all the time. You go on Facebook, and I'm sure that there are clickbaity articles about OMG, look at how, I don't know, random celebrity, lost 250 pounds, due to some crazy weight loss secret, right? There's a reason why that's there, and it's there because it knows that people might click on it, and they might click on it because, oh, I know who that celebrity is, and I too want to lose weight. Therefore, I want to know what their secret is. Even if it's obvious, that is lies, right? People might still click on it anyway out of just the sheer curiosity of it all. So that's why it's designed that way. So in terms of a fully functional society, taking into account all these little things that are deemed newsworthy, now I do want to show you another video, and we're going to actually spend some time on this video. And I'm not going to show you the whole thing because it's rather long, and it was, kind of sort of linked to your syllabus. It really wasn't, as I said earlier. If you go to your syllabus and you press that link, it takes you to the wrong page, unfortunately. So what I did was I copy and pasted the link instead. And for some reason, it brought me to this video that's very interesting. It's a conversation about, well, social media and how it processes the news, right? And then how in the public, how it, like this debate over misinformation and how do we police misinformation. How in society do we police misinformation? And I'm going to begin the video about 10 minutes into it. Again, it's long, and I don't want to spend the whole time, the rest of this class, on this video, but I am going to play really the most important part of it, really. And I want you guys to pay attention to it. I might pause it here and there, but still, I want you to hear this conversation. And maybe you already watched this video, in preparation for today's class, but still, I want you to hear what this person has to say, and I want to hear then your feedback on it.
What do you think? Close enough. Yeah, it's good. All right, thanks to Data and Society also for the invitation. Thank you for indulging. Book writers labor over our words.
So also some context, they're talking about a book that they wrote called Freedom and Moderation, Platforms, Press, and the Public, right? And by platforms, they mean social media platforms. By press, they mean news, and the public means the consumers of the news through social media.
For a long time, and it's a really cool opportunity to just read the words instead of just summarize. So it's a real treat. I'll try not to do too much. This is from the concluding chapter of the book, which is called What Platforms Are and What They Should Be. Content moderation is such a complex social technical undertaking that all things considered, it's amazing that it works at all and as well as it does. Even so, as a society, we have once again handed over to private companies the power to set and enforce the boundaries of appropriate public speech for us. That's enormous cultural power held by a few deeply invested stakeholders, and it's being done behind closed doors, making it difficult for anyone else to inspect or challenge. Platforms frequently and conspicuously fail to live up to our expectations. In fact, given the sheer enormity of the undertaking, most platforms' definition of success includes failing users on a regular basis. We must recognize that moderation is hard work, that we're asking platforms to intervene, and that they have responded by enlisting us in the labor. What's important then is that we understand the ways in which platforms are moderated, by whom and to what ends. But more than that, the discussion about content moderation needs to shift away from a focus on the harms users face and the missteps platforms sometimes make in response, to a more expansive examination of the responsibilities of platforms that moves beyond their legal liability to consider their.
So I'm just going to pause real briefly. He mentions earlier that when it comes to content moderation, some platforms enlist us into the labor. what does he mean by that? Does anyone know what he means by that? Anyone want to guess? Well, what does he mean by content moderation?
He means like showing what the people see and not like
Exactly.
some things get censored from the news and stuff. That's
Yeah.
what it means.
That's exactly what he means by content moderation, to moderate what content people see, right? And so what does he mean by enlisting us into the labor? Right? Who's he referring to? Anyone?
I
Anyone?
think he's referring to the general public and like the press itself, or it's like the stream of misinformation.
He's talking about us, the people, that sometimes we have to police what we see. So his point is, it's not always up to, let's say, Twitter, right? It's not always up to Facebook. It's sometimes up to us to police what we see on Facebook or Twitter. And then there could be a whole other question about, well, how exactly do we do that? And what's the right way to go about it? And what are the repercussions of expecting users to police what they see? But anyway, I'm going to keep on going with the video, but still, that's something kind of important, right? That social media really is a public thing, besides it just being called social media, right?
Their greater obligations to the public. Perhaps we're now experiencing the long hangover after the ebullient high of Web 2.0, the birth of social media, and the rise of a global commercial advertising supported internet culture. The bursting of a cultural bubble, if not a financial one. The dreams of the open web did not fail exactly, nor were they empty promises to begin with. Many people put in a great deal of effort, time, resources, and dollars to pursue these dreams and to build infrastructures to support them. But when you build a system that aspires to make possible a certain kind of social activity, even if envisioned in the most positive terms, you also make possible its inverse, activity that adopts the same shape in order to accomplish the opposite end. In embracing the internet, the web, and especially social media platforms for public discourse and sociality, we made a Faustian bargain, or a series of them, and we're now faced.
All right, so does anyone know what he means by Faustian bargain? Because I have a feeling not many of you know that, but does someone know what that means? Well, it means like a deal with the devil, right? Faust is based on a play about I think it was a doctor who sells his soul to the devil so he can gain more knowledge. But that's what he's saying, that to a certain degree we like sold our soul to the devil with social media to a certain degree.
Facing the sober realities they produced. If we dreamed of free information, we found we also got free advertising.
So also, I want to hear, I mean, this is actually kind of important because he's going to list a bunch of like contradictions. And the first one is free information, like we got free information, but we also got free advertising, right? So, pay attention to this as he lists them.
If we dreamed of participation, we also got harassment. If we dreamed of sharing, we also got piracy. If we dreamed of political activism online, we also got clicktivism, political pandering, and tweet storms. If we dreamed of forming global decentralized communities of interest, we also got ISIS recruitment. If we dreamed of new forms of public visibility, we also got NSA surveillance. If we dreamed of free content and crowdsourced knowledge, we also got the exploitation of free labor. And if we dreamed of easy interconnection between complex technical resources, we also got hacked passwords, data breaches, and cyber war. The companies that have profited most from our commitment to platforms did so by selling the promises of participatory culture. As those promises have begun to sour and the reality of their impact on public life has become more obvious and more complicated, these companies are now grappling with how best to be stewards of public culture, a responsibility that was not evident to them at the start. The debates about content moderation over the past decade can be read as social media's slow and bumpy maturation. It's gathering recognition that it is a powerful infrastructure for knowledge, participation, and public expression. The adjustments the platforms have already made have not sufficiently answered the now relentless scrutiny being paid to them by policymakers, the changing expectations articulated by the press, and the deep ambivalence now felt by users. Social media platforms have in many ways reached an untenable point. This does not mean they cannot function, clearly they can, but that the challenges they face are now so deep as to be paradoxical. Content moderation is a key part of what social media platforms do that is different, that distinguishes them from the open web. They moderate, they recommend, and they curate. Platforms use these three levers together to actively and dynamically tune the unexpected participation of users to produce the right feed for each user, the right social exchanges, the right kind of community. And here, right may mean ethical, legal, healthy. It also means whatever will promote engagement, increase ad revenue, and facilitate data collection. And given the immense pushback from users, legislators, and the press, these platforms appear to be deeply out of tune. So if content moderation is the commodity, if it is the essence of what platforms do, then it no longer makes sense to treat it as a bandage to be applied or a mess to be swept up. Too often, social media platforms treat content moderation as a problem to be solved and solved privately and reactively. Platform managers understand their responsibility primarily as protecting users from the offense and harm they are experiencing. But now platforms find they must answer also to users who find themselves troubled by and implicated in a system that facilitates the reprehensible, even if they never see it. Removing content is no longer enough. The offense and harm in question is not just to individuals, but to the public itself and to the institutions on which it depends. This is, according to John Dewey, the very nature of a public. It's a quote. The public consists of all those who are affected by the indirect consequences of transactions to such an extent that it is deemed necessary to have those consequences systematically cared for. In other words, what makes something of concern to the public is the potential need for its inhibition. Despite the safe harbor provided by the law and the indemnity enshrined in their terms of service contracts as private actors, social media platforms inhabit a position of responsibility, not only to individual users, but to the public they powerfully affect. When an intermediary grows this large, this entwined with the institutions of public discourse, this crucial, it has an implicit contract with the public that whether platform management likes it or not can differ from the contract it required us to click through. The primary and secondary effects these platforms have on essential aspects of public life as they become apparent now lie at their doorstep. Rethinking content moderation might begin with this recognition that content moderation is the essential offer platforms make and part of how they tune the public discourse they purport to host. Platforms could be held responsible, at least partially, for how they tend to that public discourse and to what ends. The easy version of such an obligation would be to require platforms to moderate more, or more quickly, or more aggressively, or more thoughtfully. We've already begun to see public and legal calls for such changes. But I'm suggesting something else, that their shared responsibility for the public requires that they share that responsibility with the public, and not just the labor, but the judgment. Thanks.
So what's his argument here? Right, what is the point that he's trying to make here? So I'll play that last part again.
institutions of public discourse. This crucial. It has an implicit contract
It's 11:30.
that whether platform management likes it or not can differ from the contract it required us to click through. The primary and secondary effects these platforms have on essential aspects of public life as they become apparent now lie at their doorstep. Rethinking content moderation might begin with this recognition that content moderation is the essential offer platforms make and part of how they tune the public discourse they purport to host. Platforms could be held responsible, at least partially, for how they tend to that public discourse and to what ends. The easy version of such an obligation would be to require platforms to moderate more, or more quickly, or more aggressively, or more thoughtfully. We've already begun to see public and legal calls for such changes. But I'm suggesting something else, that their shared responsibility for the public requires that they share that responsibility with the public, and not just the labor, but the judgment. Thanks.
So again, what is he trying to say through this? Right, he specifically says that the responsibility that be held that purport to host platforms could be held responsible at least to platforms to moderate
aggressively
more
or
and more
more thoughtfully.
quickly or more aggressively or more thoughtfully. Blah, blah, blah.
We've already begun to see public and
Right.
legal calls for such changes. But I'm suggesting
And
something
he's
else.
arguing that just simply making, Twitter and Facebook just censor more and more things may not actually be enough.
That their shared responsibility for the public requires that they share that responsibility with the public, and not just the labor, but the judgment.
But to also communicate more with actual people in terms of what should and should not be moderated. So in other words, instead of just looking for maybe a keyword and then that keyword sparks triggers a flag warning, that instead it has to take into more common sense with the public in terms of what is and what isn't, censorable or in terms of what should be censored. Right. So that's really what he's trying to say. And I wish he would have been a little bit slower right around here, because I actually feel like it's really interesting.
The dreams of the open web did not fail exactly, nor were they empty promises to begin with. Many people put in a great deal of effort, time, resources, and dollars to pursue these dreams and to build infrastructures to support them. When you build a system that aspires to make possible a certain kind of social activity, even if envisioned in the most positive terms, you also make possible its inverse, activity that adopts the same shape in order to accomplish the opposite end.
Right. So inverse, right? An activity that adopts the same shape in order to accomplish the opposite end, right? So something that seems similar to something else, but it has a different goal in mind. And he lists a couple.
In embracing the internet, the web, and especially social media platforms for public discourse and sociality, we made a Faustian bargain, or a series of them, and we're now facing the sober realities they produced. If we dreamed of free information, we found we also got free advertising.
Right. So the first thing he lists is free information, right? Information, but then got free advertising. Now, free information, how is that a positive thing? Like, can anyone tell me why it's potentially a good thing?
It's a good thing because of the fact that it allows people to, let's think, to learn more, to become more knowledgeable and whatnot at the cost of nothing. Like they don't have to give anything in order to learn that and whatnot. It allows the general public to become more knowledgeable of certain facts and whatnot. But at the same time, with things such as free advertisement or whatnot, it also can become a negative thing because it could spread misinformation and other stuff, other typical forms of so-called knowledge, which could um, uh, mislead people in a sense and guide
Yeah,
them towards certain things.
yeah, exactly. Free information is generally a good thing because it's people's rights, maybe to learn the news, right? To learn about what's happening in the world, or to become more knowledgeable, right? To learn new stuff. We don't have to pay someone to learn new information. Therefore, anyone can become more knowledgeable now. But free advertising is designed perhaps in a way to deceive, or to trick, right? We looked at the examples already, how something can look like something newsworthy, but really it's just lies, right?
If we dreamed of participation, we also got harassment.
Right. So participation, right? So how does social media help participation or inspires participation?
Because if you have social media, then you're better able to access more topics that you might be interested about, especially topics that are affecting society today. So you'll be more inclined to respond to it, especially since you're behind a screen. And I feel like, I don't know if it's true, but I feel like it's a fact that when you're behind a screen, you're more inclined to share more than you would if you're in person.
That is, yeah, that's definitely true. Participation could, mean participate in the conversation, right? If we get more people, for example, talking about the environment, then maybe that could lead to reforms where we save, a forest from being burned down, or saving, I don't know, the dolphins dolphins from becoming extinct, right? Just through the voice of people participating in the conversation over these issues. However, what might come with that same participation is harassment. People saying, "Oh, how dare you say this," or "You're an idiot," or "You're dumb," something like that. Criticizing people just for their opinions or their viewpoints, right? And again, this is obvious, but how has social media helped um people harass each other? How has social media made it easier for people to harass each other, I should say? Come on. I mean, we've
Social
answered.
media has some, sorry,
It's
you mind
okay.
if I talk?
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
it's like social media has made it easier to harass others simply because of the fact that it's like overall, if when you make a platform that allows people to share their ideas and whatnot, and it's like they're mostly protected, like because it's like they're anonymous for the most part, and nothing would come back to them. It encourages people to be mean in a sense, and then and to truly like express their ideas wholly and wholeheartedly without like any kind of restraint or respect towards others sometimes, some cases. Because like they know that there won't be any kind of punishment or anything involved with them if they say something messed up or rude to people, and it can lead to constant harassment of people over people not respecting each other and their different ideals.
Right, because it's made it easier for people to, as you said, harass each other instead of participating in an actual conversation. Instead, people can just comment on, you know, what someone's saying, right? You know, it's not maybe a actual structured debate or conversation. Instead, it becomes almost like a fight online, you know?
Like literally, it will start off. Sorry, mind if I
Yeah,
give
go
you an
ahead.
example?
Yeah, yep.
It's like for example, you put something down you'll put down your personal beliefs about the democracy and whatnot, and then you'll hear people come out of nowhere sometimes, and they'll just be like, "Wow, you're so dumb," yada 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 yada, and then it's
Mhm.
like they'll start with something like that, and then it'll spiral out of control into where everyone's literally cursing at each other and screaming at each other over their beliefs, and it's just kind of like, how did this happen? Like this is just supposed to be a normal civilized conversation.
Sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. It almost could become like a bar fight instead of an actual conversation amongst adults, you know? And then there'll be others who will troll others, right? And trolling, you know, could be its own form of harassment. Alexia, you had your hand up, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like you both were saying, and like we learned in the past, when you're online and you're behind a screen, like we were saying before, you're more inclined to say stuff they wouldn't normally say in real life. Because in the end, it's just words on a screen. So it's not gonna affect you as much as, let's say, getting punched in the face because of a comment you made in real life.
Right.
So if you criticize someone and they start saying stuff back, you'll get irritated and criticize them even more because you can't see their facial expressions or their body language. So it's impossible for them to intimidate you or intimidate you as much as they would in real life.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. What is the term? There is a term for that. Well, what is the term for it? Do we remember what the term is? I'm trying to remember. There's a term for it. Oh, online disinhibition effect, right? It's not an easy word for me to say. Online disinhibition effect. And what's the specific? Well, I actually could keep sharing. Hold on. I want to look up the actual um definition. Okay, yeah. Effect is a lack of restraints one feels when communication online. I'm sorry. Online disinhibition effect is the lack of restraint one feels when communicating online in comparison to communicating in person. People feel safer saying things online which they would not say in real life because they have the ability to remain completely anonymous and invisible behind the computer screen. Yeah. So, these, like comment sections, right? To YouTube videos or posts. So, sometimes people will use them to further the conversation. That's why at the end of a lot of YouTube videos, they say, hey, comment below and let me know your top 5, I don't know, favorite whatevers. Is because the user, the creator of the video actually wants to, see their viewers continue the conversation, right? But the comments section doesn't safeguard against, well, just people who are just, use it as a ability to harass others, right? And so in a democratic society, why would that be harmful? why would the ability to easily harass people be a potential problem?
Because as harassing continues, suicide rates increase.
Well, sure, that is definitely one possibility. But what is another possibility?
Things can get a little out of hand and they could end up meeting in real life, just quote unquote settle things.
Yeah, I mean, it could definitely make people more angry, right? I
It
don't
could
know.
also, oh, sorry. No,
Yeah,
continue, continue.
I was just gonna say, I don't know if these two people ever meet, but it would certainly, make people more angry at each other, right? David, what were you gonna say?
Overall, it just kind of overall, it causes negative effects across the overall like social media and the web and in real life. It can leak over into real life where people will can effectively ruin people's days in a sense, and it can also lead to increased depression and the complete like sorry, wait, complete increased depression and more, it'll lead them to become more aggressive in a sense in the future, or could possibly, yeah. I'm sorry, just that need to get.
It is true. It is absolutely true. It could affect people's emotions and how they feel. Again, we look at this TikTok girl, right? I mean, maybe she is not a particularly good singer or dancer. Maybe her motivations are completely, like, I don't know, questionable. Maybe she included a bad word in a song that is, hits a sensitive nerve to a lot of people, right? But is that still a good enough reason to attack a human being? Like, because yes, she's a celebrity now, I guess, and she's putting herself out there, but it's obvious that that harassment doesn't go unnoticed, right? We see her. I mean, there's another video that I didn't have a chance to show you guys, but you see her crying and whatever. And you could wonder, well, you're a celebrity, so you're crying with like 2 loaves of bread under your arms, um, or maybe you're just crying to get more attention. But the truth is, it does affect her. But also, let's say one person has one way of solving the climate crisis, right? And another person has their own way of solving the climate crisis. And instead of having a conversation like adults, they just spend the whole time harassing each other. Does either one of them really solve the climate crisis?
No.
No, I would say no, right? I would say no. If anything, there's even more division, right? Even more, you're wrong and I'm right, and that mentality, like tribalism, that tribalism mindset. And that's why I do feel like in many ways, social media has like, and again, I'm not trying to hate on it and say it's this horrible thing, but I think it has played a big part in why, this country often feels so divided. It's because, now, like if let's say a cousin of mine shares something that I find like offensive, now I know that my cousin said something offensive. Meanwhile, in the past, he wouldn't say that thing to my face, or he still wouldn't say the same thing to my face, and he wouldn't have the opportunity to share that information in that way. Does that make any sense? Like my perspective on somebody could change, even if that's not really a rational viewpoint. you know, like just because I share something on social media may not mean I truly believe it, but somebody else might take it literally. And that creates tension, right? Does that make sense? Am I explaining myself in a way that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
That makes sense.
Right. So, you know, instead of participation, maybe we get harassment, right? Okay. Another one. Hold on, I'm trying to play the
We
video.
also got piracy. If we dreamed
Oh,
of
sharing instead of sharing, I mean, like sharing ideas, we get piracy, right? And what does he mean by piracy?
It's the theft of ideas or not. Or like that's what I think. Like in this context, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Theft.
So instead of, for example, let's say instead of just quoting information you learn, maybe it's now easier to steal information, right? Why plagiarism is such a scary topic, and not even just, you know, in college and English class when you're writing an essay, for example, but even in life in general, you know, um, stealing, you know, trying to take claim of, you know, other people's ideas, you know. For example, uh certain music artists are now suing each other because they're claiming that their songs were stolen, you know. And I believe that's easier to do now since certain songs are so much easier to access than in the past, right? You could go to YouTube, for example, and there's a whole sea of music. And while that's a good thing on one hand, on the other hand, um, maybe now people could, you know, illegally download music, right? You know, where in the past you had to pay for it. And that falls into piracy, right?
political activism online, we also got clicktivism, political pandering, and tweet storms.
Right. So the debate over political activism, right, versus clicktivism, you know, political pandering and tweet storms and political pandering, right? So, you know, instead of like inspiring a movement on social media, like hashtag Black Lives Matter, instead you see like these politically motivated posts that like are there just to simply inspire more division, you know, as exemplified by some of the posts that some of the fake news articles that I showed you guys. Also, there is a point where he mentioned something called these social media sites often do two things. They recommend and they curate, right? I want to see the part of the video, find the part of the video where he says that. Oh, also he says,
The companies that have profited, we also got harassment.
all right,
If we dreamed of sharing, we also got piracy. If we dreamed of political activism online, we also got clicktivism, political pandering, and tweet storms. If we dreamed of forming global decentralized communities of interest, we also got ISIS recruitment.
Hmm.
If we
Yeah.
dreamed of new forms of public visibility, we also got
So, I mean, one of the great things about social media is that it helps bring people together, right? Like you're able to actually have a real-time, face-to-face conversation with somebody from the opposite end of the world. And then he uses ISIS recruitment as like an example of the negative, right? Maybe it's easier to brainwash people from other parts of the world than ever before. You know, like, I don't know. I mean, in the past, how would you think ISIS recruit its members? it would probably only focus on people within, its own countries, right? But now ISIS can recruit people from anywhere on the planet because people can access their information anywhere on the planet, right? And then he says,
NSA surveillance.
public visibility. We also got NSA surveillance, right? So again, being able to see what your friends do day to day during their daily lives might be a good thing. But that also means who else can follow you and everything you do. Who else besides just you and I?
The government, like people who tap into your computer, like they could, like multitudes of people who you don't even know could follow you.
Exactly. Now the government can follow everything you do, right? And you can say, well, that's a violation of privacy, right? And the whole issue with facial recognition technology. Yeah, public visibility. I'm able to broadcast myself on Zoom, like what we're doing right now. But that also means other people could be seeing what we do all the time. Even if you create certain parameters, that still doesn't prevent, everyone from seeing it, and if the government is watching everything we do, then maybe that would be an overreach of the government's power, right?
If we dreamed of free content and crowdsourced knowledge, we also got the exploitation of free labor.
Hmm.
And if we dreamed of easy interconnection between complex technical resources, we also got hacked passwords, data breaches, and cyber war.
Yeah, so again, if we dreamed of easy access again to to I don't know, maybe your credit card information, right? I mean, it is convenient to just have maybe your credit card information on your phone, right? If you go to make a online purchase, maybe you don't have to manually type in your credit card information. But what's the problem with that, right? What's the problem of, let's say, having your credit card information on your phone?
Hackers might find your credit card and use it.
Yeah,
and check your
hackers might hack into your phone or hack into, I don't know, the subscription page that you're part of, and then they might be able to hack your password, or find your sensitive information. Yeah, and there's really no simple solution to that right now, except don't give your password out to anyone. Or I don't know. I mean, like when I make purchases online, the first thing I do to see if it has a PayPal option, because supposedly PayPal hides your your card information. But what if somebody hacked my PayPal? Then maybe they have access to my credit card and my checking account, right?
The companies that have profited most from our commitment to platforms did so by selling the promises of participatory culture. As those promises have begun to sour and the reality of their impact on public life has become more obvious and more complicated, these companies are now grappling with how best to be stewards of public culture, a responsibility that was not evident to them at the start. The debates about content moderation over the past decade can be read as social media's slow and bumpy maturation. It's gathering recognition that it is a powerful infrastructure for knowledge, participation, and public expression. The adjustments the platforms have already made have not sufficiently answered the now relentless scrutiny.
It's
being paid
12
to them by
o'clock.
Policymakers, the changing expectations articulated by the press, and the deep ambivalence now felt by users. Social media platforms have in many ways reached an untenable point. This does not mean they cannot function, clearly they can, but that the challenges they face are now so deep as to be paradoxical. Content moderation is a key part of what social media platforms do that is different,
So anyway, what he said just there is, perhaps, we open, the Pandora's box, right? And maybe there is no way of closing it now that we've opened up all these possibilities, right? Free information, but free advertising, participation versus harassment, sharing versus piracy, right? All these things that originally had good intentions are having like this backfire effect that's, instead of bringing us together, it is actually dividing us in many ways.
distinguishes them from the open web. They moderate, they recommend, and they curate.
Right, so the social media does three things here. They moderate, they recommend, and they curate. Right, so wait, let me just back up a
And
little
have
bit
not
more.
sufficiently answered the now relentless scrutiny being paid to them by policymakers, the changing expectations articulated by the press, and the deep ambivalence now felt by users. Social media platforms have in many ways reached an untenable point. This does not mean they cannot function, clearly they can, but that the challenges they face are now so deep as to be paradoxical. Content moderation is a key part of what social media platforms do that is different, that distinguishes them from the open web. They moderate, they recommend, and they curate.
So that's the ways that social media is different than just any website, is that they moderate, they recommend, and they curate. So those are really the parameters that this person, I think he's Mike Anani, that's what he's recommending. And under those parameters, that's how the debate over content moderation should continue, is that they're not just, open websites where anyone can go onto, but they have three specific goals. And that is, again, moderating the content, recommending similar content, and preserving content as well. All right, so anyway, we're almost done here. It seems like a lot of people were having connection issues. That's why I decided to record today's as a class. But anyway, I think we're gonna meet again online on Thursday. But also either later today or early tomorrow, I'm gonna write a formal prompt for the second essay. And I think I'm gonna want the first draft due on Tuesday. Tuesday, if I look at my calendar, is what day is that exactly? Next week, Tuesday. So that is the 26th. So on the 26th, I want the first draft for the second essay due. And the first draft could be, and again, I'm going to write all this down and email it to everyone, but it's going to be 2 to 3 pages written of what you're going to write for your second essay. All right. So anyway, we have 1 more minute. So does anyone have any questions? No?
So wait, the second essay is is on Blackboard and whatnot, or it's like the prompt for the second essay, as you just said, it's like it's gonna be put on Blackboard right now.
Yeah, it is, but I'm gonna also write another prompt, like in my like own words, giving you more clearly what I'm specifically looking for. But yes, you can actually look at that prompt as a little bit of a guideline. And yes,
Alrighty.
Jacqueline is asking any questions we can email you, and yes, you can email me. All right, so it's 12:05 now. I guess I'll just see everyone next week. I mean, on Thursday. Okay,
All right.
Bye.
So
Have a good day.
Yep. Have a nice day, everyone.
Goodbye.
bye.
Take care.
Yep, you too.